And usually I like to introduce myself as this type of person. So this is my brand positioning statement. What I do is services and capabilities. I help up and coming creative people to realize their value and true potential by sharing resources and giving them a platform to share ideas that inspire and cultivate the culture of creativity. And you will see in the deck, we'll just go through that. And what I do strategy, which is discovery and research, content strategy, and positioning statements, and design thinking, which we will also dive into. And then the second thing is I do branding and design, which is rebranding, brand development, messaging, as in like what type of messaging would you like to communicate to your target market, brand style guide of branding and design. And I do content creation, explainer videos like you are attending right now. This is probably an explainer video. And I do documentation, post production, which is editing, story design, which is sequential design. And I like to tell stories um, through what I teach. And the last thing is that I'm a lecturer, which includes critical thinking, design confidence, and belief systems. And these are the type of that I've worked with or worked for, which is E3. I've worked for E3, and I run my own organization, which is Words in My Mouth Poetry Slam. I've also nibbled and dabbled with Guys IT, and I was a creative director at Music Garden, and I am a facilitator for poetry at Inibos, the only Black poetry platform to participate in Inibos. That is English based, that is. And then I'm also a lecturer at Unigrad College, and I worked as a marketing PA at Creative Brand Brains, and I also taught at Zeller Fashion School. So yeah, now the most interesting part. This is now the deck. So the first statement I want to share with you is that these three statements that I want to share with you, and this is basically our going to be our opening statement towards what we are trying to achieve today. So the first thing is ideas are cheap, they are easy to come up with, and they are also easy to throw away. Ideas for me, in most instances, are like sticky notes. It's like having a sticky note around you. It's easy to have an idea, but the problem then becomes the reason why an idea is cheap is because sometimes we cannot be able to articulate or execute the idea. And then when we have an idea, is what we call creativity. So first we have to define what creativity is before we actually think of ideas. We have to define what creativity is. And these are the four statements that I personally look up to, which is creativity. This is one of my favorites, is the novelty between non-related ideas, uh, where you take two unrelated things and mash them together. That's an idea. And number two, a quote by Pablo Picasso: "A bad artist copies, a good artist steals." A bad artist copies exactly what you do, and then a good artist, they steal the idea and they rework it, right? And there's a book called "Show Your Work." Yes, "Show Your Work" by Austin Kleon, and he talks about how artists need to be out there and how you need to be creative in such a sense that every new idea is a mashup or a remix of one or more ideas. And then the last thing, which is probably my favorite out of this whole deck, is the Holy Bible, Ecclesiastes 1 chapter 9. There's nothing new under the sun. So basically, we as humans are cultivators of creativity or cultivators of novelties. And what joins creativity together is the ability to make connections. And what I learned in design or in design school or in visual art class was that you have the ability to connect things, and then those things create this beautiful thing basically out of nothing. And that's what creativity is finding or being able to make a connection between two things. And this is probably one of my favorite quotes by Martin Neumeier. He talks about this in his book, Brand Gap, and he talks about how innovation lies. Innovation is when you are focused on one thing, and also where the tire meets the tarmac, meaning that where there's between the tire and the tarmac, that's basically the idea and the execution part of things, right? And where the friction is, where the friction lies, is where innovation is. Innovation is when you take an idea or a mashup of ideas and you articulate it in such a sense that it makes sense to people who are trying to actively participate in whatever that you are trying to bring to them. And some of the mantras for innovation is being ahead of the curve. Being ahead of the curve, meaning that you as an innovator think 2 or 3 steps ahead of your competition. One company that I look up to is The Future, and on their channel, they literally uh, base themselves as not just a creative company, but a creative company that educates creatives how to make more money. So being ahead of the curve is what what are people going to need in the next 5 to 10 years, so that you can start working on them now, so that in the next 5 to 10 years you are ahead of the curve and you know what mistakes people have done. And another thing that being ahead of the curve is, it's when an idea or a specific thing that you do is difficult to articulate right now because of the limitations of technology, but you try your level best to articulate it in such a sense that in the next 5 to 10 years it will all make sense. Innovation is experimental. It's when you are trying a number of different things and not just one thing in particular. Innovation is divergent thinking, where now that's where the connectivity part comes in, where you think of one thing but also you think of how this one thing can turn into another thing. And it's just not linear thinking, and it's all about finding the answer in D but also going back to A, but knowing very well that you have to end at M, but also M is not really the answer is also Z. So that's what divergent thinking is all about, is when you are literally trying to think of defining logic in your thinking. The other thing is we have to look at ecosystems, like in your innovating, what ecosystems can you start to implement? And a lot of people who use uh, iPhones tend to have an iMac, and then we need to start asking those questions. Do people why do people why do people who have iPhones use iMacs or a MacBook, right, instead of using a Windows phone? So it just talks about the connectivity of the ecosystem. Also, innovation is all about packaging. Packaging tends to be very, 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 very important. How you articulate the idea in terms of how you bring it out into the the market in its essence. And the last thing is execution. One of the things that I've heard that Apple does is that they wait for a company like Samsung or Hawaii to come up with a new innovative idea, but they also look at what went wrong in Hawaii's and Samsung's marketing strategy, and they try to reframe the language of how they do things. So e- innovation is all about execution. It's all about hitting the nail on the mark. Innovation is divided into three main philosophies, and there are so many innovation types, and which we'll get into the next deck. The first one is medium. So medium talks about what are you actually trying to do, right? Or the question then becomes, what medium are you using to articulate this idea that you have, or this creative idea that you have? Is the what, like, what are you using, right? And then the space talks about where does this thing exist? Does it exist on Facebook? Does it exist on a corner store? Does it exist on the internet? Does it exist on the website? That's the where part. And the format is, how do you do your thing, right? So if I have an event, I need to make sure that every once a month I'm having this event. So that's my format. That's how I articulate my innovative idea, by using the format. It's like, how consistent is it? So format is all about how consistent are you, and how are you doing things in terms of the configurations, like how do all the gears work in terms of your format. And then these are the few types of innovation. And we go into experience. And experience, when I think about experience, I think about Amazon in terms of in experience, in terms of service, how their mantra is to deliver in 2 or 3 days, just after you ordered. And when it comes to channel, I think about Nespresso, who sell these small pods. And when we look at configuration, we need to look at profit models, like how a newspaper like the New York Times pivoted their business model into becoming a digital newspaper. And then network in terms of Ford, how does everything work, and how does the unity create value. And then when you talk about Google, you think about structure in the sense that they have Gmail, they have Google Hangouts, they have YouTube, they have all these other external services. And then now they have Google Meet, which is now the competing network against Zoom, which is the platform that you're using. And then we have process is something that is novel to McDonald's, like signature methods to you doing or how you do your work. And then the last part of that is offering, which I spoke about. I spoke about product system, like Apple. They have the iPhone, the iMac, and the iPad, and the what's, and they are all linked together in terms of their system. And then we have product performance, like Spotify. Spotify has the most fantastic algorithm, solely because I'm a user of Spotify. But Spotify has an amazing product performance, and how they distinguish themselves in terms of their functionality. So these are the types of things that we need to look at as the types of innovators. So in terms of medium, space, and format, we need to start to articulate what can we use as our medium, and in terms of where can this thing exist and how do we do things. So the types of innovations is your format. Are you going to look at the profit model? Are you going to look at the brand in its essence? Are you going to look at the product performance? Are you going to look at the structure? Or are you going to look at the product system? Or are you going to look at the customer engagement, which tends to be very, very, very important when it comes to business in its essence?